Ann-Margret has always spoken of Elvis Presley with warmth, respect, and something harder to define, a glimmer in her eyes that time has never dimmed. They were two of the brightest stars of the 1960s, drawn together in a way neither of them could fully explain. For a brief moment, it seemed inevitable that they would marry. Fans waited for the announcement, the press circled, and friends whispered that it was only a matter of time. Yet, the marriage never happened. Decades later, what Ann-Margret revealed about why still carries a weight she has never been able to shake. When Ann-Margret arrived in Hollywood in the early 1960s, she was a rising force. The camera loved her, and studios saw her as the perfect blend of elegance and fire. Her breakout performance in Bye Bye Birdie turned her into a sensation almost overnight. Offers began pouring in, but no script would alter the course of her life more than Viva Las Vegas. That was the film where she would meet Elvis Presley. By then, Elvis was already a phenomenon. His fame had reached heights almost no one in entertainment history had ever experienced. By the time filming began in 1963, he was the undisputed king of rock and roll, and his movie career was still drawing huge crowds. The studio executives knew pairing him with Ann-Margret would create fireworks on screen. They were right, but no one predicted the fire that would ignite off-camera. From their first scene together, there was an ease, a playfulness, and an unspoken connection. Crew members noticed how they gravitated toward each other even between takes, as if the rest of the set faded away. Ann-Margret would later describe it as an instant recognition. Two performers who understood the pressure of living under constant public scrutiny, yet found comfort in each other's presence. What they shared went far beyond simple attraction. Both came from modest beginnings and had worked relentlessly to earn their place in show business. Both understood the loneliness that came with fame. They spoke the same language of ambition and discipline, and they shared a mischievous streak that made them laugh like old friends. The chemistry wasn't staged for the cameras. It flowed naturally. Every smile and glance in Viva Las Vegas felt genuine because it was. Director George Sidney admitted later that he didn't have to coax their energy. He simply let them be themselves and captured it. The result was electric. Rumors of a romance began almost immediately, and for once, the tabloids didn't need to embellish. Elvis and Ann-Margret were seen together off-set, riding motorcycles, sharing quiet dinners, attending events side by side. Friends in their inner circles believed it was more than a fling. They saw two people with a rare bond, one that could easily lead to marriage. Even Elvis's closest aides noticed a change in him. He seemed calmer, more focused, and genuinely happy in Ann-Margret's company. She matched his energy without competing with it. Unlike many around him, she didn't treat him like a commodity. She saw the man, not just the legend. For Ann-Margret, this was not about chasing headlines. She had her own career and ambitions, yet she was drawn to the softer side of Elvis, the man who loved gospel music, who played practical jokes on friends, who carried the weight of responsibility for his family. He confided in her and trusted her, and in those months, they built something rare in the world of celebrity, a genuine connection without the need for constant public validation. Still, beneath the laughter and late-night talks, there was an unspoken tension. Elvis was not free to love without conditions. His image was carefully managed, and the expectations on him were unlike anything Ann-Margret had experienced. For now, they kept those conversations quiet, but as filming wrapped and the premiere approached, the question pressed in from all sides. Would they take the next step? The answer, as history shows, would not be the one either of them truly wanted. In public, Elvis Presley projected confidence. On stage and on screen, he was a man in control. Privately, though, his life was not his own. Since his return from military service, every detail of his career and much of his personal life had been managed under the watchful eye of Colonel Tom Parker. The Colonel was more than a manager. He was a strategist who treated Elvis's image as a brand to be tightly controlled. When it came to relationships, Parker believed the wrong marriage could jeopardize that brand. By the early 1960s, Elvis's public appeal heavily relied on his status as an unattached heartthrob. Fans screaming his name were sold a fantasy that, in some impossible way, he could be theirs. Marriage would shatter that illusion. For Parker, pairing Elvis with a powerful female star like Ann-Margret was even riskier. She wasn't a quiet figure in the background. She was a force in her own right, dazzling, ambitious, and capable of stealing the spotlight. There was also another reality: Elvis's relationship with Priscilla Beaulieu. Though not yet married, she was already living at Graceland under circumstances Parker considered safer for Elvis's image. She was young, not part of the Hollywood system, and in Parker's eyes easier to keep out of the headlines. Ann-Margret, by contrast, was a media magnet. Every outing, every photograph, every lingering glance between her and Elvis became front-page news. For Ann-Margret, the scrutiny was intense. She was used to reporters probing her life, but with Elvis, the intrusion reached another level.
Paparazzi followed her car, headlines speculated daily about engagement rings and wedding dates, and every public appearance was dissected for clues. What the world didn't see was the toll it took. She and Elvis could hardly spend time together without it turning into a national conversation. Inside Elvis's world, there was an unspoken hierarchy, and not everyone welcomed her. Some in his circle worried she would upset the balance of power. Others simply didn't trust outsiders. Ann-Margret had to navigate not only her relationship with Elvis, but the fortress of loyalty, politics, and long-standing friendship surrounding him. And then there was Elvis himself. He cared for Ann-Margret deeply, but he was a man pulled in multiple directions. His career obligations were relentless, his personal loyalties complex. He was tied to his family, committed to the people who had been with him since his earliest days, and bound by the expectations Parker had cultivated over years. Marriage was not a simple matter of love. It was a negotiation with an entire empire built around his name. The strain began to show. What had once been lighthearted and spontaneous began to carry an edge of uncertainty. They still laughed together, still shared quiet moments, but the weight of outside forces pressed harder. Ann-Margret could feel it, even if they didn't speak about it openly. Elvis would change the subject when marriage came up. She would pretend not to notice, though deep down she already understood. Yet even in those moments, they were drawn back to each other. The pull was too strong to ignore. Both knew they were caught in something extraordinary, and something that could not last. Still, neither was ready to let go. Not yet. In time, the decision would be made for them, and when it came, it left scars neither could erase. By late 1964, the whirlwind around Elvis and Ann-Margret had reached its peak. Viva Las Vegas was still playing in theaters, the press was relentless, and fans treated their pairing as inevitable. Invitations for joint appearances poured in, and studios floated offers for more films together. On the surface, everything pointed toward a future as Hollywood's ultimate power couple. But beneath that glow, cracks had begun to form. For Ann-Margret, the warning signs came quietly at first. A canceled dinner, a postponed trip, and conversations that once flowed freely now stumbling into awkward pauses. She noticed how certain topics, especially anything about what was next, made Elvis retreat. He would smile, change the subject, or distract her with a joke. She understood the pressures he faced, yet the gap between what they felt in private and what they could admit in public grew harder to ignore. The moment everything shifted came not during an argument, but in a phone call she hadn't expected. Elvis told her in careful, halting words that stories about their romance had reached a point where they were hurting people in his life. He didn't name Priscilla directly, but Ann-Margret understood. The subtext was clear. There were commitments already in place, promises made long before she entered the picture. Continuing their relationship openly would make those obligations impossible to keep. That conversation wasn't a formal goodbye, yet it carried the weight of one. For the first time, Ann-Margret felt the wall between them harden into something immovable. They still spoke afterwards and saw each other in fleeting moments, but something essential had changed. The easy comfort of their connection was now edged with caution. Every laugh and glance was shadowed by the knowledge that time was running out. When Elvis's and Priscilla's engagement was announced in 1966, Ann-Margret did not speak publicly. She was in the middle of her own rise in career, moving from film to film, but privately, the news cut deep. Friends later recalled that she carried herself with grace, refusing to let bitterness take root. But those who close to her knew it was a wound she carried quietly for years. She later admitted that she and Elvis had a mutual understanding, built on trust and a promise to protect what they had shared. That meant no public accusations, no controversy steering interviews, no undermining each other in the press. Theirs was a chapter to be honored, not exploited. Still, honoring it didn't erase the ache. The truth was Ann-Margret had loved him, not the legend, not the headlines, but the man who sang gospel late at night, who teased her for her Swedish accent, who saw past her public persona in a way few others ever did. Walking away wasn't a choice she made lightly, it was the only choice left. Even decades later, when asked why she never married Elvis, Ann-Margret didn't speak in absolutes. Instead, she spoke of timing, of circumstance, of how some connections are real but cannot survive the weight of the world around them. In her words, it was never about not wanting to. It was about knowing that in the life they were living, wanting wasn't enough. That understanding became the heart of her later reflections, the reason she could look back with both love and regret. And it was that blend of emotions, still present after all these years, that reveals just how deep the loss truly ran. After Elvis married Priscilla in 1967, most assumed the chapter with Ann-Margret had closed for good. But those who knew them best understood it wasn't that simple. While their romantic relationship had ended, the bond they shared never truly faded. They made a quiet promise to each other, one built on mutual respect and an understanding that certain parts of their story would remain just theirs. It was an unspoken pact. No sensational interviews, no tabloid-fueled bitterness. In an industry where former lovers often exchanged privacy for publicity, they chose silence. That silence wasn't cold, it was protective. Elvis had his life in Memphis, his career, and later a family to raise. Ann-Margret had her own path, moving from film roles to concert stages. Yet the connection lingered in the spaces between their public lives. They stayed in touch, usually in ways that escaped notice: phone calls at odd hours, holiday cards, and rare backstage visits. These moments weren't about rekindling romance, but about keeping a piece of that original connection alive. For Ann-Margret, keeping that promise came with a cost. She carried memories she couldn't share, moments she wanted to speak about but wouldn't out of loyalty. It meant watching from the sidelines as Elvis's life unfolded,